Hey everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. I wanted to hop on and kind of do something a little different. I wanted to kind of do a prophetic recap. This is going to be old information for a lot of you guys, but I wanted to do something that I have not done yet, which is I wanted to put dates. With every single time that I received these words on all of the coming events. And I think what I'm going to do too is I'm going to type this up in a written format that just has all the dates of the stuff that God has showed us that's coming down the pipeline at some point. And I think I'm going to put that on my website for you guys so that you can have that in a written format. Hey, Danny, good morning. Thanks for hopping on. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it out in a video format today. I kind of went through and did some research into the dates when I received a lot of these prophetic warnings that we've been talking about over the last few months, years, etc. And I'm going to get them out to you guys today and do a short recap, but I'm also going to release a written version of a lot of this on the dates when I received them so that we can go back and we can kind of reference this stuff in the future. And I'm doing this half for my brain because I'm just curious, and I like to have stuff in a written format so I don't have to go hunting for it in the future. So I'm going to work on that. That's a project that I'm working on kind of behind the scenes right now. But I also have a couple of updates. I had a new prophetic dream I wanted to fill you guys in on. That could be potentially regarding stuff that's coming down the pipeline. And then just a few things that I'm kind of getting an uptick on in my prayer times that I think would be good if we could keep covered in a place of prayer. So that's what I'm going to be doing, is kind of chatting with you guys about all of this. And so I'm going to be saving that dream for kind of more towards the end, the newer dream. And I just want to throw out dates, and I'm not going to go into detail on these dreams today. Because if you guys want to reference that, we've got a whole archive in the YouTube library that you guys can go look at on dreams that we've talked about in the past and previous, prophetic warnings that God has kind of put out. So that's not my purpose today, is to go super in depth. I do just want to put things to dates today so that you guys can see kind of when God talked to me about stuff and, what's going on there. And then we will dive into the new stuff on all of this, and we'll get going from there. Hey, Sue Bird, good to see you too. Thanks for hopping on. Okay, so let me dive into some announcements real fast while we've got people still hopping on. And then I will start diving into some of the stuff that God has showed us, okay? So, ladies, if you were interested in the champion calls, those are one-on-one calls with myself. Those are mentorship calls. So if you're looking to just grow in your walk with God, those calls are available to you guys. All of this stuff you can get to through my website at jillsharpministries.com. There's also 2 ebooks that are available, more on the way. The first one is on how to cast out demons. It's a little bitty short one. That one is not long. And the other one is the chapter book. That one is called Unmasking Leviathan. That's a book that talks about pride. Okay, so we've got that available. There's all kinds of other good resources. We've got some really cute merch that's available. All that money goes back into the ministry. So we've got some really cool t-shirts. Thank you to those of you guys who have purchased a lot of that. And we've also got stuff like written journaling, devotionals, all kinds of other cool resources. So if you guys are interested in that stuff, go check it out. And I will be working on more to come with all of that. Okay, I think that's most of what I had. And I might be pausing a little bit. I've had a lot of sinus drainage and my voice is kind of in and out. So I'm going to try to stay hydrated during this. Okay. And I'm not sick. It's just normal, like sinus crud. Okay. All righty. So let me talk to you guys. What I want to do is I just want to start off and kind of go rapid fire through all of the words that God has given us. And I want to actually put dates on these today, on when I received these things, so that if we need to go back and reference this in the future, we can. So the first thing that I wanted to reference was the word that we got on blackouts and internet outages. That was a word that we had. I received that on July 17th, 2024, and we've already had a partial fulfillment on that, right? So that word went out. And then shortly after that, there was the whole cloud strike thing. You guys remember that, where the internet went down and, it really locked up airports and businesses, and there was all kinds of stuff with that. So remember, that was on 7/17/2024. But that was also that same dream was one where God talked about, there being financial decline coming, specifically to the United States of America. That was the one where everybody got the quote unquote bad haircut, if you guys remember that dream. And I will say with that, even though I think that we've had a partial fulfillment on that one, which praise God, I don't think we're done with that yet. This is just a gut hunch and Jill talking. Technically, there were blackouts at the Olympics right after that in Paris. So, I mean, we can technically call that one fulfilled too in that way. But my gut suspicion on this is Jill talking, not Jesus, okay, is I think that if you guys remember, that was the dream where it was talking about financial stuff and the downfall of the financial system. With all of that other stuff in the dream, I'm thinking there's something bigger on the way with all of that, probably, if I had to guess, because they were in the same dream together, right? So I don't know that 100%. That is Jill talking, not God. So it'll be interesting to see if there are more blackouts that are more significant that come down the line, specifically, since it was kind of in the same dream, that was mentioning kind of the financial stuff that's also coming at some point. So anyway, Danny, you were so awesome. Thanks for logging all of this. Anyway, so that was July 17th, 2024. We talked about that. Okay. And all of this, if you guys needed it in reference, you can go find it in the archives on YouTube. Okay. Because I did a lot more individual videos on a lot of this previously that you guys can go check out. Okay. On January, February, March, April, April 18th, 2024. So last year, April 18th, 2024 was the dream where God talked to us about the Antichrist coming on the scene. Okay. And that was during our lifetime in this dream. And so again, I don't have time to go back through that with you guys in detail, but that was when we had that one. So April 18th, 2024, that was kind of the dream about the Antichrist. In that particular dream, Christians were already set up in the Goshens that I've been talking to you guys about. They were trying to hardcore catch Christians and stuff and investigate to bring them down and to put them in jail and or kill them. Like, we were in pretty heated times. So that dream was one that we had a while back. So 4/18/24 on that one. Okay. The next one was, and I can't remember if I've shared this one. This one may be a new one to you guys, but I was going through the archives on stuff that I've mentioned, and this was another one that came up. It was a really quick dream. I had this one on August 28th, 2024. Okay, so this was August of last year, August 28th, 2024. And it was just a really simple dream of crop fields. Okay, just looking out across acres of crop fields, and they were dry with dust and they had nothing in them. Okay, so it's just dusty fields and there was nothing growing in the fields. And so I don't think I've run that one by you guys. That was on August 28th, 2024, and it was about crop fields that were basically barren. Okay, moving right along, I also had a dream. This one, and I'm kind of kicking myself for this. I wrote this in a prayer journal, but I've been trying to keep this stuff cataloged on my phone too, just because I can reference that more easily and look stuff up. I know it was in 2024. I don't have an exact date on this one, but I can tell you it was in the year of 2024. I can say that pretty confidently. That was the dream about the farmer's field and the war dream, if you guys remember. There were the warplanes that were in the United States, and they had landed on this farmer's field without his permission. And it was destroying all the crops. You guys remember that? And it's like the United States was preparing to go to war, but people didn't know about it yet in that particular dream. So I'm kind of kicking myself. I don't have the exact date on that one other than it was in 2024. Okay, so we've got the farmer's field and the war dream talking about war coming to the United States, and also potential impact to crops. Danny is so awesome. Thank you for cataloging all of this. I'm putting Danny to work today, apparently. He's sweet for doing all that. Okay. So that was the next one, the farmer's field and the war dream 2024. I don't have an exact date on that, but I got it in 2024. Okay. So here's the next one. This dream I received on February 25th of 2024, February 25th of 2024 on this one. And this was the dream talking about the switchover in the financial system that's coming. You guys remember this one? So this was the dream where there were all the bears that began to attack outside. We had to go into the new system, right? We went into, they were kind of putting people in queue lines, right? And it was kind of talking about like the reference to the payment rails, all of that good stuff. And switching over to a new financial system and how it happened relatively quickly. There were still some quirks that they were working out, right? But it was a pretty sudden shift, right, of switching into a new financial system. Okay. So again, that dream happened February 25th, 2024. That was the train station financial dream. Okay. So I wanted to throw that one back out there again. Okay. Moving right along. I think this is a new one for you guys. I have not brought this up. This was a really quick like vision / dream right as I was waking up. It was another one that was kind of a reference to war. And it was just a really fast thing where it was like in the dream, there was this kind of it seemed like an aircraft or maybe a war type thing. I don't know, but it was just like there was a really, really loud bang almost. It was like, and the whole house shook or whatever. And this thing, it was like, I could tell it just went through the sky instantly kind of a deal. And I heard the words sonic boom along with this sonic boom. So I assume that that's in reference to like probably war stuff that's coming down the line. But it was like audibly, I heard the word sonic boom. Like, I mean, God was like talking to me, like he said the words sonic boom. And so that one was on September 25th, 2024. And I think that had ties to war. So like lots of stuff going on with all of that. So I wanted to throw that one out there. I don't think I told you guys about that. I'm throwing in a few new ones today that are just little short things that I wanted just to be sure to get out there so that we could have these cataloged for the future. We talked about the New Madrid fault line and a potential, not good earthquake that's coming down the line. I released this word on September 29th, 2024. So September of last year, we talked about the New Madrid having issues in the future. And again, I don't know timing on this stuff, you guys. So I have no idea. God's the one who knows the timing. And I try to be real careful on that stuff because a lot of times I'll tell you guys the way that this works. When you're getting things from the Lord, a lot of times it'll seem closer than it actually is. And you have kind of a little bit of a skewed perception, right? When it comes to timing, and the prophetic, a lot of times stuff will feel like it's really close or it's really urgent. And you might not see it for another 6 months to years to whatever, and then sometimes stuff will come to pass pretty quickly, so that's why we just have to use discernment with this stuff and why I try to be particularly careful with that regard on stuff. But again, the New Madrid fault line and an earthquake that happened on 9/29/24 for the date on that one. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for working on all this, Danny. Okay, all right, moving right along. The tornado dream that I often reference with you guys, the dream that was kind of referencing the storm. Remember, everybody was they were all Christians in this dream, and they were in this room and they were gathered together for like a worship night, and the storm hit and stuff flew around and a tornado hit the building, but somehow miraculously everybody came out unharmed, right? That was symbolic of what God has been calling the perfect storm that's on the way with all of these events kind of combined, and how Christians will come out unscathed because we're protected by God. Now, we were still in the shaking part of this, right? But we were protected through it, and so that particular dream happened November 3rd of 2024. So 11/3/2024. So that was the dream referencing what God has been calling the storm with us that's on the way, which I think is going to be a series of events of a lot of stuff that's coming in. All right. Okie dokie. So we've got that. So that we have the tornado dream, aka referencing the storm that's coming in. This one I want to kind of preface before I dive into this. There's a lot of war winks, and I want to talk about a little bit more with this today too. This one, I did particularly have visions of this in a prayer time. So this was not a dream. This was visions and stuff that I got out to you guys a while back. But God was talking to us about this particular stuff well before this particular date. I just got to go track down the earliest that we talked about this, which I think I released it in a video more than kind of written format on this. So I'm going to have to go back and listen to videos to get the exact date on this one. But I can tell you this, but I just wanted to tell you we were talking about this before this date on some of this stuff. Okay. So November 20th 2024, so 11/20/2024, I got in a prayer time visions of missiles and bombs coming. And there being issues of missile and bombs hitting, the United States and different nations just being at war or whatever. And remember that we have also been talking heavily about God's been kind of warning us about weapons of mass destruction. And I will tell you guys, I think that we prayed off some major stuff a while back. Thank you to those of you guys who participated in that fast a while back. But, kind of the way that this works, and when I'm hearing from God in my prayer closet, and I'm going to try to describe this the best that I can. It's like when we pray, there's an urgency over some things, right? And for some of this stuff, when we pray stuff off, it feels like it completely goes away or it subsides for a season because we intercede as the body of Christ together over stuff. Kind of with reference to this weapons of mass destruction stuff and this war stuff, we've prayed over it and it was effective. And I do think that we truly ward some stuff off in the spirit realm, but it hasn't fully gone away. Okay. It's still there. All right. So I say all of that to say that I think that we still need to be praying heavily over war stuff. And God is still warning us about weapons of mass destruction, particularly those that are going to be similar to nuclear in nature, right? Missiles, bombs, all of this stuff. I continue to get visions on this in a place of prayer. So please just stay prayed up because God is still emphasizing this war stuff a lot right now. And we just want to stay prayed up. So anyway, 11/20/2024. That's kind of what we were talking about with all of that. Thank you, Danny, for doing this. Okay. This one was received on 12/8/24, so December 8th, 2024. And this was a dream right as I was waking up on this one. Interesting, Charity. See, there's confirmation. God talks to multiple people about this stuff, Okay, so sorry, I digress. 12/8/2024. This was where I had the dream about the hammer hitting the United States Federal Reserve building, and it caused a crack that went right down the middle of the building. You guys remember this one? And so the Federal Reserve, which is the bank basically of the United States of America, was going to take a major hit. Okay. So that's what I got out of that particular vision. So that one again was on December 8th, 2024. So we can expect some kind of a hit that the Federal Reserve is going to take, and I think that hit was symbolic of, it's going to take a hit somehow, so we'll have to watch for that one. Okay. The next one was just like a audible thing that I heard from God. And I'm just telling you guys all the confirmations on different stuff. Some of these are dreams. Some of these are just individual words that I've gotten on stuff. But 5/9/2024. So May, right? May 9th, 2024. I can't count today. I just heard this phrase in a place of worship. I heard the phrase, war is coming. War is coming. Okay. So short, simple, and to the point, but God's been warning us about war, and all the kind of stuff that is on the way. Okay. And again, if I'm moving too fast, because I know Danny's trying to catalog stuff, I'll put out a written version of this for you guys a little bit later. Okay. The next one, and I think I've told you guys about this, but I'm not 100% on this one. So I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I had a dream, and this one happened on August 24th of 2023. Okay. So this was not last year, but the year before. This is one of the earlier ones I'm throwing out there. And in this dream, it was of a bunch of like houses that were on fire. And they were like instantly lit on fire, kind of a deal. And I was in my house in this dream at the particular time, and I was kind of looking around, and I noticed that the houses next to me were catching on fire, and I knew it was coming for me fast or whatever. And I was like, what is this about? Like, I didn't understand what was going on with all of this, and I went in the dream to go in to try to flip the light switch on at my house, and I noticed that the power was not working. Okay. And I think there could be a lot of causes behind that kind of a thing. It could be a number of stuff that God's already brought up with us, that he's giving us warning on. ahead of time that could be coming down the pipeline, So I don't know on that one, but it seems significant. So I'm throwing that one out there too, of all the houses that were on fire and the power not working. And that one was on August 24th, 2023. Okay. All righty, moving right along. The next one that I received was on September 23rd, 2024. So 9/23/2024. And this was the dream that I've been referencing and bringing up with you guys quite a bit, which was the black swan event dream, that there's some sort of a black swan event that is coming. And remember in that dream that, basically society operated, the way that they always had up until a certain point. It was like watching the play. And then after this big event happened and they arrested this person who was responsible for the black swan event, whatever this was in this dream, right? And I think that person was symbolic. I'm not saying that a literal person's going to get arrested per se. It was symbolic, right? Dreams can be symbolic sometimes. But in the midst of that, what happened was society as we know it changed completely. Like we no longer were able to go back and operate the way that we used to because of this one event that happened. It changed everything, right? So what is a black swan event? A black swan event is something that happens that's kind of, out of proportion of what you normally expect, something that takes you by surprise and something that causes major ramifications or consequences, a lot of the time. And so God has not showed me, specifically what that's going to be. He just said there's going to be a black swan event. And again, I received that one on September 23rd, 2024. Okay. So we're doing our recap here. Danny, you are awesome. Thank you for helping with this. Okay. Next one. I got this on July 28th, 2024. July 28th, 2024. Okay. And this was the one that was the dream that was referencing the eventual collapse of the US dollar. Okay. And in this particular dream, remember, it was a vision of a $100 bill. I did a short video on this if you guys want to go back and look at that. But the $100 bill had it burned up halfway through the middle of it horizontally. Okay. So not vertically, but horizontally. It burned up like halfway down horizontally through the $100 bill. And it kind of paused there for a second in the dream. And then eventually the rest of it burned up completely. So the dollar was, completely gone. And so I think what this represents is there's going to be a significant devaluation of the dollar at some point where it's not going to hold as much value, maybe close to the 50% mark, since the dollar was burned about halfway through. I don't know. All I know is it signifies a significant devaluation that's going to be coming in the future. And then eventually the dollar burned up and went away. Okay. This should not be a surprise to us because we know in end times via conversations we've had about the book of Revelation, what's going to be happening the closer that we get to the last days is the world is going to start working more towards a one world currency, aka the beast system. If you guys remember in the book of Revelation, it talks about eventually it's going to get to a place where in order to buy or sell, you have to receive the mark of the beast, right? And so what they're going to do is they're going to head everyone or try to head everyone towards a one world financial system where everybody's on the same currency system the closer we get to the end times, okay? And am I saying that we immediately go into that right after the dollar collapses? I don't know on that. There could be a different form of currency for a little bit. It could look a little different. I want to be very careful not to put words into God's mouth on this stuff. So I don't know if we're going to go directly from point A to point B when the dollar does start to have issues. But I do know that God has showed us that eventually the dollar is going to collapse during our lifetimes, probably. And that there's going to be some issues there. Okay. All right. So that's the next one was the collapse of the dollar. Received that on 7/28/2024. Okay. Here's the next one. This was the dream regarding lockdowns, aka I'm calling it potential martial law. I try to be careful throwing out terms like that because I just want to tell you guys what I saw, but I think it was probably referencing martial law, but I can tell you with confidence it was lockdowns. Okay. And it felt like it was nationwide. Like it felt like it was more than just a little area in this. Okay. Now it could just be specific areas. I don't know. I did not hear that specifically from God, but it just felt like it was larger reaching. Let me put it that way. So in the purple bus dream, remember, there were lockdowns, there were curfews, people just couldn't go out and do stuff willy-nilly, right? There were specific hours where people could go out. They were tracking people very carefully in this dream. Remember, my car in the dream, I was a little bit worried about it because our cars had to be registered and they were towing people's cars off if they didn't belong. There was just a lot of like very heavy scrutiny that was happening, and we were in a state of lockdowns, which I think probably represented martial law kind of a deal. So I don't know that it was martial law 100%. I do know for a fact it was lockdowns, but I'm assuming that it might have been martial law. But again, that is Jill talking, not Jesus. What I saw in the dream was lockdowns of some sort with curfews. Okay. So again, February 1st, 2024 on that particular one. Okay. And then now I want to hop into briefly the most recent dream. And I kind of prayed on this for a few days before I just was going to throw this one out there to you guys. But since I've gotten multiple winks at stuff, I just wanted to kind of talk about this one. And this one I got very recently. This one I got April 6th into April 7th. It was a dream that I had that night. So we can call it April 7th, 2025, I guess. And this one had to do with, I think, potential warfare stuff coming. And in this particular dream, I was at my sister's house in the dream, which is interesting because her house didn't look anything like her house would in real life or whatever. And we were both standing outside and it was nighttime in this particular dream. And we were looking up at the sky and we were just kind of hanging out. And in the dream, I looked up and I like pointed at the sky and I said, look, so-and-so, I'm not going to tell you my sister's name just in case she doesn't want her stuff all over the internet, but I looked at her and I said, look, there's shooting stars in the sky, and so I told her, look up, they're shooting stars. And it looks like this stuff was just falling in the sky kind of a deal. It was like a white look. It looks like shooting stars. It really did. If you guys have ever seen like a shooting star kind of a thing, it looks like that or whatever. And she looked at it. She was like, oh, wow, cool. And we just kind of continued what we were doing for a little bit. Well, not that much later, what happened was we both it's like I started to get this uneasy feeling in the dream a little bit, like something doesn't feel right. And I looked up at the sky again, and there were these very camouflage looking how do I describe this? I don't even know how to describe this. They looked like black Jeeps in the sky, but they operated like drones, okay? And you couldn't see them until they were almost on top of you because, again, it's dark outside, and they painted these suckers black so that they would blend in or whatever. And they were like as big as cars. They were huge. These things were massive. You would not think that they would just be able to go through the air like this, so low down, but they were able to in this particular dream. And they were shooting stuff out of them that was not good. I have no idea what the substance was or if it was like a weapon of some sort. I don't know. But that's what we saw, like the shooting star stuff or whatever. That was the substance. So it was interesting. You couldn't see that they were like drone-like things or whatever these are, right? You couldn't see that because that part was very well camouflaged into the night. Like they had really worked on this in a sneaky way. But you could see the stuff that was coming out of it or whatever. So, anyway, in the dream, we looked up because it was almost on top of us at this point because this stuff was very well camouflaged in this dream. And I looked at her and I was like, we got to get in the house now, kind of a deal. Close the doors, close the windows. And so we went and we were running into the house and we started to close the doors and close the windows very, very quickly. And she, in the dream, she had the doors where they're all glass where you can see in really easily. And in the dream, it's like we knew that we needed to get where they could not see us and where we needed to get in the middle of the house and to hunker down. We knew that we didn't need whatever those things were to know that we were around, kind of a deal. So that was a dream that I had very recently. We can call that one this month, April 7th, 2025, on that particular dream. And I think it was more of a war wink. I don't know if those things were drones, but they operated a lot like drones. And they were massive, whatever these things were. Okay. And I wanted to tell you guys this too. I don't have a specific date on this one because this was like probably a decade ago. This is interesting. Look at this comment from Brittany. She said, years ago, I had a dream like this, and the people were flying military airplanes. I had a sense in the dream it was Russia or China. Yeah. There's been a lot of stuff, I do think probably it's going to end up being with Russia and China. That's Jill talking, not Jesus. But I think that, yeah, I think we're getting close on stuff. Thank you for cataloging all of this, Danny. Okay. So let me go back to kind of a decade ago, and I don't have an exact date for you guys on this, but I had a dream that I was living in this house and it didn't have blinds around it, and it was nighttime. Okay. And it had like these big open windows, and there was this big white drone looking thing. And at the time when I had this dream, I couldn't have put a label on it as a drone. It operated like a drone, but I didn't really know to put a label on it because this thing was big. Right. And I wouldn't have expected at the time, for drones to be that big. And it was like this white thing that operated like a drone, and it was like scanning inside of the house. Like it would hover in front of people's windows looking in their house. Right. And it's like this thing would just scan for people. It would scan for intel. Like it was really creepy. Like it was a creepy dream, it was like scanning for all of this stuff. And so I kept trying to like get out of view in the stream of this thing because I didn't want it to know that I was there. And I kept trying to like close the blinds or whatever, some of the windows didn't have blinds, but get in a place, where this stuff would not be able to look in at me. And at the time, I just felt really uneasy after the stream, but it just stuck with me, and I think that it's also, I think now looking back in retrospect, I just want to tell you guys, my gut impression on a lot of this, just kind of from themes that God is bringing up with things, is I think we're going to see more having to do with drones in the future. So just be watching for that. I think that drones are going to be used potentially with military stuff, and with enforcement and just different things, but also just in general. I think that we might be hearing more on drones the closer that we get to the end times and watching them used in different ways. So anyway, I digress, but I was getting stuff on drone-like stuff, even like close to 10 years ago, I just didn't have words to put with it, on stuff. And so I think that they're going to be used for surveillance a lot. They're going to be used potentially as weapons a lot. So just praying against all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So let me highlight this from Brittany. See, this is cool. God talks to the body of Christ about stuff. She said in her dream, they were in military helicopters looking in the windows of homes and apartments. Wow. And I've had multiple dreams like this. And when they saw me, the military people came to the door. Wow. Yeah. I'm telling you guys, that's very interesting. I don't know. But there's been a lot of people who have just been receiving stuff. Because you know what? God doesn't just talk to one person in the body of Christ. He talks to a lot of different people. He brings confirmation and he warns us ahead of time on stuff. So the other thing was, this is another thing that's more recent. And it was just a quick word. I got this on March 31st, 2025. I was in a church worship service, just kind of like worshiping or whatever. I was tuned into an online service. They were just worshiping and I was worshiping along kind of at home. And I just heard the phrase from God, prepare for war. And so again, I don't know time period. That could be a while from now. It could be very, very quickly, but God is continuing to talk about war stuff and just making sure that we're prepared for stuff that's coming in. So to recap with a lot of this stuff, actually, let me back up before I recap on some stuff. I also heard that same day on March 31st of this year, I also heard the phrase drone warfare, which is a lot of why I popped on to talk about these dreams. I like to pray on stuff a little bit before I just get it out there sometimes. But that was kind of my confirmation, is on the 31st, I heard the phrase drone warfare. And then I had that dream about the stuff that was acting like drones, the black looking Jeep stuff going through the sky. I have no idea if they were drones or not. It could just be some kind of a military aircraft. But the other thing I did not mention, let me mention that about that dream, about the, black Jeep looking things that were shooting stuff out of them or whatever. In the dream, my sister and I had kind of a knowing that we were potentially going to be under attack from other countries, but we just didn't know, like the actual attack itself took us as a surprise, right? But it wasn't an attack. It wasn't it wasn't a surprise to us that we should be watching for stuff, like we knew where it was coming from in the dream. So I also thought that was interesting. That's an important detail that I forgot to include, I think. So anyway, so we were under something. I don't know. Anyway, okay. But to recap on a lot of this stuff that is coming, I felt like God just wanted me to talk to you guys too on stuff that a lot of you guys who have been around for a while, but we got new people who tune into this occasionally. You know what? It's good for all of us to kind of, have some recap. Yeah, Danny. Yeah. So we're already starting to see, some stuff you guys know about this, but I just think that they're going to be utilized in a bigger way in the future, somehow in different ways, because God's hinting at this a lot right now, So to recap on stuff that's coming in. Okay. So let me just throw out some scenarios, and this is not to scare people. We don't have to be afraid. We got God, and he's already told Steph specifically that he's going to protect a lot of people in the body of Christ through this. Okay. Because we're not done yet. We got into time assignment, y'all. But I do want to kind of talk to you guys about some little things that you can do potentially right now to make sure that you're prepared for the days ahead. Because I think when a lot of this happens, it's going to be sudden shifts. Okay. I want you guys to remember 2020 and the events that happened, right? With the sickness stuff that came through. It happened very quickly, right? And that one event caused major ramifications, where people had to stay in their homes for a little bit. Businesses started to operate differently. We ran into supply chain issues because people started hoarding stuff, and buying excess. There was all this stuff that went down. And so whenever a crisis hits in some way, shape, or form, people react similarly a lot of the time. Okay. And so I want you guys to take this to your prayer closet. Now, I felt a little bit of an uptick on the black swan stuff. I don't know if that means that it's super far away or super close. But remember, that was the event that changed everything. It changed the way that our society operated as a whole after that event happened. So I want you guys to just think about that as an example. There's multiple things that could cause us to have issues. The dollar collapse would be huge, if that happened soon, right? Because think about how bad the Great Depression was. A lot of times we don't have any concept of that because we have not lived through this stuff in our lifetime, right? But it would be massive, like there's shortages in stores, and to complicate and to pile stuff on top of this, if it were to happen soon, think about just the impact of the tariffs that are going on right now, that alone in itself could cause inflation and raising prices potentially for a short amount of time, so there's just a lot of stuff, right? And that's also something that's talked about in the book of Revelation down the line. Is remember that they talked about like what was it? Loaf of bread was going to be a whole day's wages, or wheat or something. You guys remember that part? So there's going to be major inflation in the end times is what I'm trying to say. I'm probably butchering exactly what it referenced, but there's going to be major inflation that the book of Revelation talks about. So even if this stuff is not imminent, right, it is coming down the line. The Bible talks to us about this stuff, so if that were to happen, I want you guys to think about stuff that could potentially help you in the interim for you to have at home. Okay. Now some of us don't have funny money as a budget. Okay. And so if that's you, just know that God's going to take care of his kids. If he's got to do it supernaturally, if he's got to do it other ways, I don't want you guys to panic or be in a place of fear, because God's already warned us that he's got us. And he warns us about this stuff before it happens because he loves us, right? He doesn't want us to freak out at this stuff when it comes. We get a heads up because we're in the body of Christ. We get the news before the news, right? But if you have a little bit extra that you could be spending or putting into stuff right now, I would encourage you guys, if we went through a time period where we lost power, think about the impact that would have. Gas stations might go down temporarily. You might have a hard time finding stuff to cook with, like think about all the implications of that kind of stuff. Because God's talked to us about blackouts. He's talked to us about, lots of different stuff that could be potentially coming soon. So what would you want to have on hand? Especially, he's also talked to us about there's going to be food shortages, right? And the crops having issues. So if you combine that, God's called this whole scenario over the years or however long this is going to take, the perfect storm, right? And problems pile on top of each other. And as you guys know, based on 2020, all it takes is one major event to really cause a lot of chaos and to affect multiple things, right? Okay. Which God's not just talking to us about one major event, he's talking to us about multiple major events that are coming down the pipeline. So what would you want to have in your house for that? I think that, thank you, Danny. Yeah. But what would you want to have in your house through all of this, right? Ladies, I'm gonna talk to you for a second. I know that we love our makeup. I know that we love our L'Oreal, our Clinique, our Maybelline, right? Hold on, I just got a knock at my door. Give me a second. I'm just gonna pause. I'm not gonna hop off quite yet, but just give me a second.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Yeah, come on in. I'm on a live, so I'm going to keep going. But
You're good.
Okay.
I'll hang with you seconds.
Okay. Hey guys, sorry, they're just changing out an air filter real fast. But I want you guys to think about it, right? Like, what would you guys need, and what would be non-perishable that you can keep around, right? What are those things that you would call necessities? That's the kind of stuff that I want you guys thinking about going into all of this, right? Because in 2020, you guys can kind of think about kind of the ramifications and the different things that happened, and how people reacted to all of that. So again, we're getting a heads up on this stuff. So I just kind of want you guys to be prepared for this stuff, and think about you personally and your household and what you might need, right? So like, for example, let me give you another example of stuff. If you know that you and your family need life-saving medications, right? It might be a good idea to check with your doctor ahead of time to get a little bit of a back supply on that stuff if you can. There's a lot of different stuff that I think that we can be thinking about. I know this is going to seem silly right now, but it might not down the line if the stores don't have stuff. Think about stuff that perishes quickly. It might be a good idea to go out and buy some seeds. And maybe you're not in a situation where you can do like an actual garden type of thing, right? You can get a bucket, I know it's kind of special, but you can go get a bucket from Home Depot or Lowe's for pretty cheap, and you can fill it up with soil, and you can grow a tomato plant on your back porch if you've got an apartment, with a little porch or something, but what would you want if the stores didn't have anything in them? Non-perishable goods are really, really important, right? So canned stuff, and a lot of times the non-perishable stuff is the unhealthy stuff. Think about what you would want long-term. Okay. So do you want to just be eating SpaghettiOs long-term and ramen and all of that stuff? I know it's convenient and it's a little bit cheaper for that stuff, but I would think about stuff that is going to help to sustain you long-term and that's cheap, right? Beans and rice, vegetables, canned fruit, proteins that you can get, that kind of stuff, that kind of stuff is probably going to be what's more helpful down the line. And you know what? We need to be God-led. Because a lot of people can go rush out and get a bunch of stuff and then it expires on them, and you've just wasted all that money. Okay. So you need to take this to your prayer closet with God and run this by him. Don't just do something because I'm throwing recommendations out there. Okay. You need to take it to your prayer closet. And, if stuff's about to expire, you might want to eat on that stuff, so don't just buy stuff to buy stuff, make it stuff that your family would actually enjoy, for all of this. But, God's warning us that stuff is coming. And this is the kind of stuff I want you thinking about. I'll go back to my makeup spiel that I was going on with the ladies. That stuff is fun, but it's not a necessity. A lot of ladies would be like, yeah, well, you haven't seen my face. It is a necessity. Not when times we got to understand context here. I'm not trying to scare you guys, but when times get real, that's not going to be what your first priority is. Okay. Everybody's going to be looking ratchet potentially. Okay. You want to be thinking about, do I have toothpaste? Do I have deodorant? Please do that for the sake of the people around you. Have toothpaste and deodorant. What are we prioritizing here, right? Have shampoo on hand, I would recommend having a back supply of water. A lot of water systems, our water that we get in our homes, it runs off of electric pumps that go to and from people's houses. And, they've got backup generators for temporary power outages and stuff. But if the power went out long term, that could affect your plumbing. I'm just trying to get you guys thinking about stuff, right? So what would your family do? If you've got elderly family members or people, if the power was out for a long period of time, do you have generators? Do you have propane? Do you have gas to keep this stuff up and going, right? And if you can't afford that, what are your backup methods going to be? Like if it's burning up hot outside, and the power's out for days on end, what are you going to do to feel comfortable? And God sustains us through all of this. He really does. And I'm not trying to freak you guys out. You don't need to be freaked out, right? But a lot of times we don't think through this stuff thoroughly, on what the cause and effect of some of these things would be if they hit. And God's talking about it. And there's been multiple people with a reliable track record that have been talking about the same types of things, that are coming down the pipeline. And so there's been a lot of witnesses to this, right? So God's warning us about things that are to come. And yes, I think certain things with this just are going to affect the United States, but certain things are going to be worldwide. This is a good one, Danny. Listen, this is cheap. Bar soap is cheap. You can go to a Dollar Tree. You can go to, a bunch of different places to get this kind of stuff. Think about what are necessities, right? A lot of times we like our creature comforts. We like that kind of stuff, but what could you not live without? That's the kind of stuff that I really want you guys to focus on. If you are going to stock up on anything, you know what? And if you don't have money, I don't want you to panic. God's got you on this. Or if you have a little bit of extra money, just buy one extra of something at the store when you go to the grocery store. Remember the toilet paper debacle in 2020, stuff like that can be really, really helpful. So anyway, you guys know what you would consider stuff that you really need in your household if stuff was going on. So just be thinking and praying on that. And I'm not saying you got to go hoard everything under the sun. I'm not saying that, but if society had to go under lockdowns for a little bit and you weren't able to access stuff the way that you normally would or whatever, do you have a few weeks, maybe months, pray about that part, but do you have enough that if something happened that affected the supply chain for a little bit or people's ability to be in the factories or to go to work, that you and your family could make it through okay? That's the kind of stuff that I just want you guys thinking about as we're going into this. And I want to remind you guys, going back to the whole Joseph conversation, right? We're talking about a lot of people are about to step into their new mantles. There's mantle shifts going on. Leadership's about to switch out. Joseph was raised up in a time of crisis, right? In order to be a solution to people, and so the body of Christ, yes, it represents a time of promotion and elevation for so many, but it's not without a purpose, right? There's going to be people who are hurting. There's going to be people who need help, right? And so these funds and all the stuff that God's been talking about, it is going to be necessary, right, to help people through hard times that are coming. He's going to use a lot of you guys to be a solution in times of crisis that are up ahead. And when the world is freaking out, the body of Christ is good, right? Because we got Jesus, So anyway, I just wanted to kind of remind you guys of some stuff that I know we've been talking about this stuff, but I think it's just really, really important for us to keep this in our noggins on stuff that's coming down the pipeline and just have a refresh every once in a while, because God's talking. He's talking about stuff. Anyway, okay. Well, I got to go. I got some stuff I got to go do. I've got an appointment coming up soon that I got to get ready for, but I will leave it there for today. And I'll try to get the written list out to you guys on stuff, just so you've got kind of a catalog of the dates. If you guys need anything, my email address is jillsharpministries@gmail.com. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to chat with you guys, and I will chat with you again soon. And a special thank you to Danny. Thanks for frantically typing and cataloging all of that as we went. All right. Bye, guys.